October 23, 1944. Just after dawn, in the cold grey mist of the Philippine Sea, the tiny silhouette of the submarine USS Darter, SS-227, crawls ahead of the huge Japanese fleet. It's 04:45 hours, and somewhere to the east, the massive warships of the Imperial Japanese Navy's center force are steaming north through the Palawan Passage, heavy cruisers and battleships forming a dark line on the horizon. Commander David W. Merrill of Darter tries to steady his nerves in the cramped conning tower, waves slapping the hull, the air salty, electric with tension. Behind him, the crew are alert, listening devices humming, periscope just above the surface, torpedo tubes ready. The enemy flagship, the heavy cruiser Atago, flies its flag high, Admiral Kurita aboard, confident of his mission. But no one aboard Atago notices the little sub lurking ahead. By 05:24, the first torpedo streaks out, and Atago is hit. Minutes later, she begins to sink. A flagship lost. At the very moment the Japanese fleet believes itself secure, the unseen threat of a small American submarine force turns the tide. Quiet, deadly, almost invisible. The reckoning has begun. The sinking of Atago wasn't an isolated strike. It was a moment born from years of escalating struggle in the Pacific. By late 1944, the Japanese Empire was desperate. After the loss of Saipan in July, the Philippines became the next and perhaps final barrier protecting Japan's home islands. Retaking it meant severing Japan's access to vital oil from the Dutch East Indies. For the Americans, under General Douglas MacArthur, the invasion of Leyte was the decisive move to break Japan's spine. Admiral Kurita's center force represented Japan's last major gamble, a fleet of 23 ships, including the mighty battleships Yamato and Musashi, 10 heavy cruisers and destroyer escorts. Their mission: smash through the Sibuyan Sea, reach Leyte Gulf, and annihilate the American invasion fleet. Facing them was a small, silent group, the U.S. Navy's submarines USS Darter and USS Dace, patrolling the Palawan Passage. Both were Gato-class submarines, roughly 311 feet long, with a crew of 80 men. They were fast, maneuverable, and lethal, armed with 24 Mark 14 torpedoes. But in the vastness of the Pacific, they were mere gnats against an armada of steel monsters. Commander David H. McClintock of Dace and Commander David W. Merrill of Darter were veterans of the silent service, calm, methodical, and invisible. Their orders were simple: intercept any Japanese fleet heading south. What they didn't know was that the largest naval battle in human history was about to begin, and their tiny steel tubes would strike first. The Japanese, confident in their size and firepower, saw submarines as nuisances, not threats. That arrogance would prove fatal. As Atago, Takao, and Maya advanced in line formation, each cruiser carved through the fog at 23 knots. On board Atago, Admiral Kurita studied his charts, convinced no American force was near. He was wrong. Submarines like USS Darter had earned respect but not fame. The Pacific was littered with the bones of their predecessors, boats lost to depth charges, aircraft patrols, and mechanical failure. Early in the war, American submariners struggled with torpedo malfunctions. The notorious Mark 14 often ran too deep or failed to detonate, leaving crews furious as their targets escaped unscathed. For many, the ocean was both battlefield and tomb. Commander Merrill knew this all too well. He had spent countless hours at periscope depth, watching Japanese convoys slip away due to dud torpedoes. Even the smallest mechanical glitch could turn a perfect ambush into a suicide dive. The Japanese Navy, for its part, considered anti-submarine warfare secondary. Their ships carried limited sonar equipment, and escorts were spread thin. They relied instead on the vastness of the ocean as their protection. In October 1944, however, things were changing. The silent service had adapted. Engineers had corrected torpedo flaws. Captains were now aggressive, bold, and patient. They had learned to stalk their prey for days, predicting movement by sound and tide. But still, the risks were enormous. Darter and Dace had ventured deep into enemy waters, where Japanese air cover could appear at any moment. Each time the periscope broke the surface, Merrill risked detection by planes or radar. The ocean swelled in restless grey curves, hiding danger and opportunity alike. Inside Darter's control room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Metal walls, sweating condensation, the air thick with diesel and fear. Every man knew that once they fired, there would be no retreat. As the sonar operator whispered faint contacts, large propeller screws, multiple bearings, the crew realized what they were hearing. An entire fleet. Sound bearings increasing. Large formation, came the quiet voice through the headset. Merrill looked up from his chart table. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He didn't yet know it, but those vibrations in the water belonged to Atago, the flagship of Japan's remaining hope. At 5:15 a.m., October 23, 1944, USS Darter reached attack position. Through the periscope, Commander Merrill could make out the shadowy outlines of Japan's center force, row after row of cruisers and battleships cutting through the calm waters of the Palawan Passage. The sun had not yet burned through the mist, and the sea shimmered like polished glass. It was the kind of stillness that only comes before chaos. Merrill gave the order to dive to periscope depth. Range, 1,000 yards. Angle on the bow, 30 degrees port. His voice was calm, but every man in the control room could feel the tension. Atago, the lead cruiser, was in his sights. The Japanese flagship, bristling with 8 8-inch guns, carried Admiral Kurita himself. Its decks were filled with men who had no idea death was seconds away. "Fire one!" The torpedo whooshed from its tube, then another and another. A spread of 6 silver streaks tore through the darkness, leaving trails of white bubbles. Merrill held his breath, stopwatch in hand. 30 seconds, 40. Then, impact. The submarine shook as if the ocean itself had roared. "Hit! Hit forward!" cried the sonar operator. Atago shuddered violently. Flames erupted from her forward magazines. In moments, the pride of the Japanese fleet was listing hard to port. Her bridge was engulfed in smoke. Sailors tumbled into oil-slicked water. Admiral Kurita barely escaped with his life, pulled from the sea by the destroyer Kishinami. Darter didn't stop there. Turning slightly, Merrill lined up on Takao, Atago's sister ship, and fired another salvo. 2 torpedoes slammed into her side, crippling the cruiser. Behind him, Commander McClintock's Dace moved in like a shadow, finishing the job. Meyer, another cruiser in the formation, was struck soon after and exploded in a fiery plume. Within 20 minutes, 3 of Japan's most powerful cruisers were either sunk or disabled. The enemy's proud formation was now chaos, ships scattering, guns firing blindly into the mist, destroyers frantically searching for a phantom attacker that had already vanished beneath the waves. Down below, Darter's crew erupted in restrained cheers. Years of frustration and loss boiled over in that moment. They had done the impossible. 2 submarines had brought an entire fleet to its knees. For the first time in the war, the Imperial Japanese Navy's commanders realized the terrifying truth. Even their mightiest ships were vulnerable to small, unseen hunters. In the hours after the attack, the Pacific lay eerily calm again, but the balance of power had shifted. The success of Darter and Dace wasn't just luck, it was the product of a long, painful evolution within the U.S. Navy's silent service. Early war caution had been replaced with precision and aggression, driven by experience and blood. Commanders like Merrill and McClintock had learned that the ocean could be both ally and enemy. They mastered the art of sound, the hum of propellers, the echo of sonar pings, the faint hiss of bubbles after a torpedo launch. Every man aboard could read the water like a book. They knew that victory depended on timing, patience, and silence. Technologically, too, America had adapted. The Gato-class subs, once considered experimental, had become reliable workhorses. New radar systems allowed detection at greater distances. Improved torpedoes finally exploded as designed. Even tactics evolved. Submarines now hunted in coordinated wolf packs, sharing information via encrypted radio bursts to ambush convoys. But adaptation came at a cost. Just hours after the triumph, fate struck back. As Darter pursued the crippled Atago, she ran aground on Bombay Shoal. The sub's steel belly tore open against coral. Trapped and exposed, Merrill ordered the crew to destroy classified equipment and abandon ship. Nearby, Dace surfaced under cover of night, rescuing every man aboard before scuttling the wreck. The proud little submarine that had slain a flagship was left broken on a reef, her final resting place still visible beneath the Philippine waves today. Yet her mission lived on. News of Darter's strike raced through the fleet, boosting morale as the Battle of Leyte Gulf erupted in full fury. American air and sea forces crushed the remnants of Kurita's command days later. The once invincible Japanese Navy, now headless and scattered, would never again mount a large-scale offensive. For the silent service, Darter's sacrifice was proof that strategy mattered more than size, that in modern war, intelligence and stealth could defeat pride and armor. The subs became the unseen backbone of the Pacific offensive, strangling Japan's supply lines and sinking over half its merchant fleet by war's end. The sinking of Atago marked more than a tactical victory. It symbolized the beginning of the end for Japan's surface fleet. When Admiral Kurita was fished out of the oil-slicked sea, drenched and humiliated, it was more than just the loss of a ship. It was the shattering of illusion, the realization that Japan's vaunted capital ships could no longer guarantee control of the Pacific. In the days that followed, the Battle of Leyte Gulf exploded into chaos across 4 major engagements. American carrier groups struck from the skies, torpedo planes screaming down like hawks. The Japanese plan, known as Shogo 1, unraveled completely. The center force, stripped of its flagship and key cruisers, could no longer coordinate its attacks effectively. Confusion spread through the ranks as American submarines and aircraft herded the once proud fleet into slaughter. The victory at Leyte wasn't only about firepower, it was industrial and psychological. The U.S. Navy's submarine fleet, just 2% of total personnel, had by this point sunk over 5 million tons of Japanese shipping. Merchant convoys that once carried vital oil and ore from Borneo and the Dutch East Indies now lay at the bottom of the sea. Japan's engines of war sputtered from starvation. Back home, the lessons of Darter and Dace were studied intensely. Their success proved that communication, coordination, and patience could amplify the strength of even the smallest vessels. American engineers improved sonar arrays and radar detection, while strategists rewrote naval doctrine to prioritize stealth and surprise over brute force. In Japan, survivors from Atago carried home a different lesson. Their letters and diary entries, later recovered after the war, spoke of shock and disbelief. That a tiny, invisible foe could deliver such devastation. For many sailors, the loss of the flagship was the moment hope truly died. One survivor recalled watching Atago sink beneath him, her bow rising like a black wall before vanishing into flame. "It was," he wrote, "the moment the sea turned against us." By 1945, the submarine had become the silent reaper of the Pacific. For every massive battleship Japan launched, America sent dozens of small, patient hunters beneath the waves. It was a symmetry made manifest, and it worked. By the time the guns fell silent at Leyte Gulf, the Imperial Japanese Navy was shattered beyond repair. Atago, once the gleaming pride of the fleet, lay beneath 600 feet of water, her flag gone, her admiral saved only by luck. The war at sea had turned irreversibly. What began as a contest of battleships ended as a struggle of endurance and ingenuity, where stealth, radar and code-breaking mattered more than armor or tonnage. For the men of Darter and Dace, the victory came with mixed emotions. They had struck a blow that echoed across the Pacific, yet their own submarine lay wrecked on a reef, proof that in war, triumph and tragedy are often inseparable. Commander Merrill, standing on Dace's deck, watching his old boat disappear beneath the waves, reportedly said little. He didn't have to. Everyone knew what it meant. Their mission had cost them everything but their lives. In the years that followed, naval historians would point to Darter's ambush as a perfect example of asymmetric warfare. A small, disciplined force using precision and patience to defeat a giant. The attack revealed the fatal flaw in Japan's strategy, an overconfidence in size and strength, and an underestimation of intelligence and adaptation. Admiral Kurita, years later, admitted that the loss of his flagship left him shaken. "I felt," he said, "as if the ocean itself had turned against Japan." His words capture the deeper truth of Leyte Gulf, that technology alone doesn't decide wars. Mindset and humility do. As the Pacific War drew to its fiery end, the silent hunters of the deep continued their work, unseen and unsung, ensuring that Japan's war machine starved itself into surrender. And somewhere beneath the shallow waters off Palawan, the rusted bones of USS Darter still rest, her story etched into the silence she once mastered. A tiny submarine, ignored by a mighty fleet, had written the final chapter of Japan's naval empire, one torpedo at a time.